Welcome to the home of the Murrieta Hot Springs, located in Murrieta, California. This property has some of the most interesting history around in Southern California. Let's visit this history by traveling back to the late 1800s. After Europeans entered the Temecula Valley, they recognized the curative and cleansing powers of the bubbling hot mineral springs. Man and beast alike dipped into the pools to heal sores. Early visitors to the hot springs would follow winding trails of low cliffs to find Native American paintings on rocks and evidence of an old village site. Juan Murrieta, who bought the Temecula Rancho in 1873, dubbed the region Murrieta Hot Springs. In 1887, the Murrieta Steam Laundry Company shipped dirty clothes from San Diego for washing in the springs with a 3-day turnaround by train.
My great-grandfather was Fritz Gunther, the founder of the hot springs. He was born in 1848, died in 1912. Great-grandfather started out in Germany, came to New York, was a cabinet maker. Then he went to Chicago, built pool tables in around 1871. Then he went from there to Los Angeles. He had 2 sons, Hugo and Rudy. Hugo was the older. They started a saloon, and ultimately they owned 5 to 6 saloons, and most of them were downtown Los Angeles. After being in the saloon business for so long, they really realized that they wanted to do something different, because he had been from Germany, where they had a place called Baden Baden, where they had a lot of baths and hot water and hot mineral. So he thought he might want to try that. When they were in the city, they had access to boxing, sports, bicyclists. They knew all these people. So that ultimately, when they came out to the springs and started to develop property, people would come out in the 1930s and train for boxing from LA.
The resort was surrounded by 500 acres of farmland that was all part of the resort.
The land behind us that we didn't use was our neighbors who were dirt farmers. They would raise their crops back there. They would have hay or alfalfa, and my family would just let them take care of that, because it provided a fire break in the case of anything going awry. And we never had any fires here. And in those days, the population was 207.
So it's changed a lot. And Murrieta Hot Springs Road between 395 and Winchester was a little 2-lane road. So this was really out in the country. Today it's a little different. Well, you got the big Loma Linda Hospital in there, and you got shopping centers. There was no Temecula at the time, other than a few scattered farms out on the hill. This is not what I grew up with.
When the resort was first established, Murrieta Hot Springs was an oasis in a landscape of fields and barren countryside. The city of Temecula was small and underdeveloped, proving the resort to be remote and isolated from the rest of society. Clientele, especially Jewish people familiar with European spas, came by train for long, luxurious vacations at the isolated resort, where staff catered to their whims. They escaped pressures of everyday life by relaxing in bubbling mineral springs and lounging in mud baths, playing miniature golf and tennis, and swimming. Dining tables laden with tempting food accompanied generously available drinks, even during Prohibition. Accommodations were luxurious, and the entertainment was glorious, from ragtime to big bands according to the era. During evening hours, people danced, played pool, or cards. Guests from all over California and even the country would visit Murrieta to spend time at Gunther's Murrieta, dubbed California's greatest health resort. Most traveled by train. Fritz Gunther met visitors from Los Angeles at the Santa Fe train station in Murrieta twice a day and transported them in his motorized bus. He housed them in 3 large hotel buildings that replaced the original tents of the resort. Residents of the nearby city of Murrieta provided service and labor to the resort. The Gunthers successfully operated the facility that was frequented by Jewish families, Hollywood celebrities, and other tourists who stayed for sometimes a month at a time.
Rudy designed the architecture and the planting of the trees and the layout, and Hugo was running the business. The business thrived even during World War II, even in spite of rationing, because they had pig farm, laundry, housekeeping, dairy, and they had an airstrip, and people from Chicago, New York, LA came in through the years, mostly Jewish clientele, and discovered recently that even Palm Springs, back in those days in the 20s and 30s, people were very reticent about having Jewish people around. They were very discriminating, but we didn't have a problem with it.
It was fun coming into a different world. You know, you have Germans serving the Jewish people, which was interesting to me. So wherever it got really cold in the winter, and I think we can relate to that today and what these poor people are suffering in these New England states. And it's like, no wonder they come here. You know, they would come in like mid-November and they'd hang around till like mid-May. So, I mean, when they came, it wasn't, you know, this was home for them for a long period of time. So that was interesting also. And that's why they needed the longer term accommodations.
There were 3 major springs located at the Murrieta Hot Springs Resort. The principal or main spring was the Siloam Spring, also known as the Big Spring, and the Fountain of Youth Spring. The 2 other major springs were Bethesda and Ramona Springs. All 3 springs were located within approximately 30 to 40 feet of each other. The temperature of the springs reportedly ranged from 135 to 170 degrees Fahrenheit. 2 minor springs, Cripple Creek and Radium Springs, were located near the Tule Swamp. The Tule Swamp was the original site for collecting mud for the mud baths promoted by the resort. Radium Spring was diverted into the Cripple Creek bathhouse where people could sit and soak their feet. The mineral bathhouse featured a series of small rooms with sunken tubs and floor-to-ceiling tile. The tubs were 4 feet deep and 5 feet long, with steps for getting in and out. Many who visited the hot springs back in the day believed that the hot springs had healing properties, so they would use long-handled ladles to drink the mineral water. Thousands of people claimed to have been cured by the healing mineral water. Many actually enjoyed the taste of the water. Those who drank of it thought it tasted better with a little salt. The small alcoves held containers of salt to flavor the water, like salting a hard-boiled egg. Often guests filled jugs and bottles to take water home. While it cannot be said that the water actually did heal illness and disease, the draw for potential healing was great. This advertising was based on fact, since the drinking water at the springs actually aided digestion, while bathing in it relaxed and soothed sore muscles.
The baths were they were maybe 30 inches wide, not very wide. They had, I believe there were like 3 steps down, and they were probably close to 4.5 feet deep. So I got ready, went in there, and the guy says, "You've got 15 minutes. Is that all? At 15 minutes, I was so weak from the mineral water, he had to almost drag me out. It was that effective. Now I know why the people that came here were so sold on the place. They really liked to drink the sulfur water. That was one of the main reasons they came. It wasn't necessarily for the baths. It was very much for the sulfur mineral water because it had such great health benefits."
In the early 1900s, resort employees harvested mud from the Tule marshes and chopped it into squares with machetes to be carried by truck to the mud bath house. A continuous flow of hot mineral water through the mud house helped guests to relax, as it was known to ease bodily aches and pain. Soothing hot mud baths or thick mud and Tule mash were believed to draw toxins and impurities from the body. Guests raved about the curative powers of the mud baths.
Where the pond is today, up by the little sanctuary, that was all swamp area. And we would go in there and cut up pieces of mud, and then you would chop into them small little blocks, and that was the mud for in the mud bath house, where you would change out the mud every once in a while.
And I would watch the guys on their little Cushman scooters go down there with their flat shovels and cut like adobe bricks that were the mud that they would put in the mud baths. So all the roots were in it, the frogs were in it, and everything else. And it's like, don't worry, we inject it with steam to kill the wildlife that's in it. So it's like, I said, I'm going to pass on the mud bath.
Guests often enjoyed massages after baths, and then they would nap in the sunshine. Physicians, including a Dr. Mudd, resided on site and were available to guests. This was advertised as a place where people could leave all their ailments in the mud. Many new buildings had been added, attendants catered to guests, and over the next several decades, the resort became famous. The pool was once a main attraction of Murrieta Hot Springs. It was open to the public and their families, as well as resort guests. At designated times each week, in the summer, the pool was open to the community also. The original pool, called the Plunge, was filled with mineral water, naturally heated by the hot springs. It was enclosed under a roof and was open year-round. The warm mineral water in the pool gave comfortable and therapeutic soaking, especially soothing for arthritic discomforts. The building was removed by 1929 when the pool was renovated, allowing poolside sunbathing. The pool was filled with fresh water, not mineral water, and was not heated. The gymnasium overlooking the swimming pool was the guest workout room for decades. It housed equipment for weight training, rowing, tumbling, juggling, and boxing.
And I went to work in the swimming pool. And I was a locker boy back then to open the lockers on the men's and women's side. I would pick up the mats and deliver the mats out where people wanted to sun themselves. And then before and after swimming pool hours, it was a cleanup of the pool area. And it was just kind of like heaven. We were sitting on this hill, and right down below us we had 2 tennis courts and a swimming pool. And that was the only swimming pool in the valley way back then. So it was just awesome.
The pool has gone through 4 or 5 incarnations. It was originally tiled from Italian and Dutch tile. None of it exists anymore, but that was where I worked. And the other favorite place was really just in the grounds here, because people would I worked in the dining room, I'd see people when I delivered room service. It was a real community, yeah. People would come bring their families, and even generation to generation.
The dining room, built in 1904, was once illuminated with gas lights. Guests passed through the office to enter the spacious and cheery dining room where waiters were ready to serve them. The kitchen was in the rear of the building behind the dining room.
My grandfather was a storekeeper and the buyer for all the supplies for the resort at that time. And on a Saturday, we could have up to 400 guests here.
Though the resort was known for its excellent food, many guests would stop at the sundries counter to purchase Alka-Seltzer or another brand of antacid after overeating. Then the well-satisfied patron would often take a stroll down Murrieta Hot Springs Road. The Los Angeles Angels once trained at the Murrieta Hot Springs. In March of 1911, members of the Coast League team came to Murrieta during an unseasonably rainy spring training. Members took hot mineral and mud baths and held alcohol rubs and massages. Hugo Gunther was at their beck and call. No one knows the circumstances surrounding the autographed photo of Marilyn Monroe. Hugo never talked about it. After Hugo passed away, the family found the picture in his files. The occasional entertainers who came to the Springs enjoyed comfortable anonymity during their stays, and this may have been one of those occasions. Mel Blanc, the man who gave the voices to the famous Warner Brothers cartoon characters, delighted guests at the Springs with his voice characterizations. The Gunther children remember when he autographed copies of his record album covers. He was a person who made everyone feel special. The dance auditorium, also called Memorial Hall, was constructed in 1912. It was dedicated to the memory of Fritz Gunther for his visionary development of the resort. Gunther's Murrieta Hot Springs provided top-billing musicians to entertain guests on holidays and weekends. Famous trumpeteers, clarinetists, and pianists played songs while dance instructors taught guests the swing, the mambo, and the cha-cha. When professional musicians were not at the resort, talented waiters and lifeguards doubled as instrumentalists. Even Fritz, Rudy, and Bud Gunther joined in when needed. The original design for the theater is still intact today. The Annex Hotel was the first major attempt to bring the hot springs into the 20th century. Prior to the construction of the hotel, individual units were located there, and the area was called Cottage Row. The Monterey Hotel was completed in 1904 and the Californian in 1908. The Annex was completed in 1926 to accommodate the large population of visitors. The hotels were advertised as having steam heat and possessed all the modern conveniences of a first-class resort, including running water and a toilet in each room, and were heated by radiators supplied with steam generated at a boiler plant on property. In 1963, rates and accommodations, which included breakfast and dinner, cost $27.50 to $29.50 weekly for 2. Mineral and mud bath charges were extra. Today, these rooms look much the same and are used for retreat and guest lodging. This horse-drawn fire engine served Gunther's Murrieta Hot Springs Volunteer Fire Department from 1909 to 1912. The resort was so far from any other towns, it had to be self-sufficient. Fortunately, its services were never required. The resort was advertised as a place for rest and quiet, but also for its recreation. According to a brochure, there are so many things to amuse that it would be impossible to enumerate them. Badminton and crochet were favorite pastimes. The Springs advertised a beautiful sporty deluxe 18-hole miniature golf course. The amusement auditorium was constructed in the 1920s and used as a clubhouse for the miniature golf course. The clubhouse was designed with a rustic charm inside and outside. The outer courtyard featured an open fireplace. It was a coffee shop in the late 1950s, a recreation room in the 1960s, and is now currently a Christian bookstore. The 49ers room was a frontier bar where thirst vanished. It was constructed in 1933 at the end of the Prohibition, bringing into the open the sale of alcohol that was previously hidden under the dining hall. The space is used as a coffee shop today.
But it was fun coming in the bar and sitting, watching the guys out there working. They come in, "Geez, Clyde, what are you doing sitting in here? We need you out there." It was the only cool room I had down here because the trees had all been removed and it was a hot place.
Many of the employees of the hot springs lived on the resort and enjoyed eating in the workers' dining room. There were up to 185 employees at times who served as many as 500 guests. Workers lived in dormitories and in cottages. Some employees worked as long as 40 years at the resort.
And a lot of the employees back in those days, they lived in little cabins. We had different areas. You had like apartment complexes. There were dormitories like. Employees lived in there. And in behind the annex was 2 rows of cabins called the 300. The 400 went down to where the boiler plant is.
One of the things that was kind of fun while I was down here, Gunther's decided that they needed to have a gas station. And it was the only building on the other side of the street. It had 2 bays, a restroom in the little lobby, and I think it had 4 pumps. That was it. So it was an itty-bitty station.
I would run that gas station on weekends by myself, and then during the summer there was a gentleman there, and he and I ran the gas station during the summer.
The location of the original administration building and dining hall was the grassy area in front of Stone Lodge. The bus stopped there to deliver the guests to the resort. In 1963, a new administration building was constructed for $1 million with an upstairs dining room and downstairs coffee shop. The building housed the resort office, bar, dining room, and the kitchen is still in use today. Previously, there were horseshoes, badminton, and croquet courts there. The spacious dining room, designed to utilize natural light, gave easy access to the kitchen to the left. In a less formal setting, the coffee shop offered short-order meals all day long, in contrast to dining upstairs on linen tablecloths. Remodeling in the late 1960s and early 1970s evidenced the changes taking place in the management of Murrieta Hot Springs. After 68 years, the Gunther family decided to sell the institution that was also their family home. Taxes were burdensome, and people expected more anonymity. Everything was different from the resort hotel and spa they started in 1902.
People weren't coming here, they were going to Vegas. That was the hot spot to go to. And so, or Palm Springs. And so they would go a little bit further. It was easy to fly over there, and at the same time it was the drive here.
Ultimately, what happened was in the 60s, the business started to die out a bit because of air travel, people not traveling with their families and their kids so much. So it became a whole different world out here. By 1969, there was few of us left. So we sold it to Irvin Kahn, a developer out of San Diego.
Irvin Kahn, an attorney and real estate developer who had visited the resort as a child in the 1930s, bought the 500-acre Murrieta Hot Springs in January 1970 for a little over $1 million. His lawyer, Morris Shenker, later joined him as co-owner. Kahn and Shenker renovated the traditional family resort and marketed it as a recreation spa where they hosted golf and tennis tournaments. The new owners spent millions of dollars on site improvements and spa development in the still remote area surrounded by rolling countryside. They developed a freshwater lake, creating a quiet and peaceful atmosphere, and built condominiums around it. To raise money and purchase and renovate the resort, Kahn secured funding from a variety of sources, including union money. After Kahn died unexpectedly in 1973, ownership passed to his partner, Morris Shenker, a lawyer for the Teamsters Union. Jimmy Hoffa, a man linked to much organized crime, stayed at the Springs during this period shortly before his mysterious disappearance. In 1977, the Securities and Exchange Commission charged Shenker with fraudulently obtaining $28.5 million in loans from the union pension funds. The property went into bankruptcy.
There was a lot of money sunk in here real quick, and most of the people that were involved with the property ended up in jail.
In 1975, R.J. Rudd, a self-proclaimed doctor of philosophy, an economist, and a Baptist minister, leased the hot springs. Rudd and his associates set up a clinic promising to cure cancer patients through a diet of lemon juice and water. Desperate patients came for treatment from all over the United States. 3 investigative reporters were sent by 60 Minutes to Rudd to seek treatment for one of them. The 60 Minutes expose, which also featured Mike Wallace grilling Rudd, aired twice during 1978. Sheriff's deputies raided the clinic in September of 1977, and Rudd was indicted for selling bogus shares in his scheme. The cancer clinic venture failed, and the Springs were abandoned for several years, except for a chiropractic office and Shakespeare's Bar and Grill. In 1983, a holistic group called Alive Polarity bought the resort. The 300-member community turned the facility into a vegetarian, no alcohol, no tobacco, no caffeine, no telephone, and no television commune. They followed a philosophy of a nonviolent life. Most of the members were in their 30s and had given up careers for a lifelong commitment to the commune. They lived on the grounds, worked at the resort, while their kids went to an Alive Polarity school on property. The neatly dressed people included teachers, nurses, and others with college graduate degrees. Alive Polarity operated an aggressive marketing program advertising the spa in publications to attract visitors, not to convert them but to bring income to their compound. They advertised gourmet vegetarian meals, saunas, steam bath, facials, mud baths, and mineral water soaks in tiled tubs during stays from one night to a month. They only operated Murrieta for 5 years.
They had some different lifestyle. It was in some interesting stuff that had to do with the brain, getting the brain balanced.
Murrieta Hot Springs sprang back to life in 1995 when Calvary Chapel of Costa Mesa purchased it as a Bible college and conference center. Calvary Chapel of Costa Mesa could have razed the buildings and started over, but the chief administrator, Pastor Chuck Smith, saw a historical treasure in the edifices that bridged the gulf of nearly a century.
We got down here and looked at what we saw. It was a disaster. About 10 rooms were actually usable. Going into the Monterey building, where every room was stacked high with just junk. It was used as a trash dump. And there were old beds, there were old, bed frames, there were just, stacked floor to ceiling. The kitchen was basically wall-to-wall cockroaches, appliances that didn't function, gas ovens. We had to replace everything. And so everything which is now used for the conference center, as far as for the retreaters, those were abandoned. We had over 300 people on the payroll working on the property because we wanted to open this thing up for a retreat. We needed something that would accommodate 300 ladies. We were real eclectic in our design, of the place. And so we had a lot of concrete, we had a lot of tile. We had stripped a lot of tile, that some of the pieces of tile are hundreds of years old, that we wanted to save and incorporate into our scheme of things. Chuck had a heart for, he see these old buildings, and he really wanted to save them. He loved the idea of taking this whole mess and this wreck that this facility was and just to turn it into what it is today. He gave me a lot of liberty as far as what the place looked like, and he liked the idea of trying to maintain some of the historical appeal to this place.
The Calvary Church bought it, and then they put all their resources into it and kept most of the same buildings, restored much of what was still salvageable.
Reconstruction was completed for the first guest retreat in October 1995. Since Calvary finished the restoration process, Murrieta Hot Springs has housed Murrieta Hot Springs Christian Conference Center and Calvary Chapel Bible College. Murrieta Hot Springs Christian Conference Center has been up and running since 1995, refreshing the people of God by offering an oasis for Christians in the greater Southern California area and beyond. The garden-like landscaping gives the impression of paradise when a guest enters the gate. College students are not the only ones who enjoy the view. The Conference Center welcomes hundreds of retreat guests each weekend. Groups from Calvary chapels or other Christian affiliations reserve space in advance at the oasis away from the busy city, where historic buildings provide a glimpse back to the days of the world-famous Murrieta Hot Springs Resort.
I looked around the grounds here and I was just amazed. The hotels, the Monterey and the California are probably better condition than they ever were at that time. I just kind of got goosebumps about what took place here. Pastor Chuck Smith, he had this vision from God, what to turn this place into. So I got to really come back here and see what had taken place. And when Pastor Chuck Smith came here, this place was just filled with trash and there was just homeless living here. It's a wonder the place didn't burn down. But what he's done here to me is just so incredible. And I have a lot of memories by growing up here. Yeah, it was my home growing up here.
And I'm really delighted what you people have done with this place. Like you took all the old tiles out of the mineral baths and incorporated them around all of the planters and the walks. That just brings back a ton of memories for me. Now, how in the world could anybody remember tile?
It was always, and even today, it's so much quiet. That's the thing that we used to like about coming down here and working, because it was different.
What stands out most to me is that I was able to have a little part of this thing. All I can do is stand back and watch this thing unfold and see God's people being blessed, being used, and being transformed. It's a very unique place.
The place has a lot of meaning in my heart, and it's just tremendous what has taken place here.
From time immemorial, the Murrieta Hot Springs have beckoned visitors to its mineral-rich waters for recreation, relaxation, rejuvenation, and reflection. Some of the world's least known individuals have chopped mud, washed laundry, and cleaned baths, and some of the most well-known musicians and comedians of all time have performed and relaxed at the springs. Once you have visited the springs, you will be hooked, and like many others throughout the decades, you will want to return time and time again.